So I've just demonstrated in the previous video how you can do a sort of colour blend with felt tips using just the primary colours. We're going to try this with you in classrooms with an actual set of watercolour paints. Now in the department we would normally use the tempera blocks, they're about so big, and we'd only give you red, yellow and blue. So we're giving you a full colour palette, but that actually could mislead you. So what I'm going to get you to do on your full colour palette first of all is look at the red you're going to use. Now if we look on here, there is a red here. I'm going to say this is a cadmium red, arty term, and there's a crimson. And whichever one you use, you must stick with. So you can't change partway through your colour wheel because you're going to be mixing colours, and it has to be either this pinker red or the orange red. Now your yellow is fairly obvious. You've got a yellow and a yellow ochre. That's your yellow ochre. And we are going to just use the yellow. And the blue, we have two blues. We have a blue here, it's like a French ultramarine. My brush isn't particularly clean, that's why it looks slightly purpley. French ultramarine blue, which is a bit like the blue with the felt tip I've previously used. And then a second blue, which is like a Prussian or Phalocinian blue. Now I'm going to argue that that blue is on the green end of the spectrum. So I'm going to suggest you use this blue. It's going to make much nicer purples. My preference would be for you to use the crimson and the French ultramarine and the yellow. So those are the ones I would be looking out for. Now your palette might be slightly different from this one. I've got a palette straight from the cupboard, so you can see it's brand new. Now if we look at the paints I've mixed so far, they are very watery. But I did get the pigment off the block, off the dry block, with, I've got my little pot of water. It now looks slightly blue because I've just been using those colours, but I'm going to put it onto the red. I'm going to put it on my crimson red, and I'm dabbing. So I've dabbed a little bit. It's darker than it was before. Dabbed a bit more. It's darker than it was before. Now, can you over dab? Here's the question. You are smart young artist, so I'm just going to dab, 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 and I'm going to paint it and see what's happened now. When I've got more pigment in the water and drag it on the surface, you get this dry brush technique. The artist John Constable used that to create light on bushes, but that's not going to fill the areas on our colour wheel particularly well. So we need to get a better flow. We need a little bit more water. So that looks like it's got good flow. Now, if we look at our colour wheel, it's a very old colour wheel that we've had knocking around the department for years, and it's slightly distorted, but we're going to use it anyway. There's a little R in the centre here, in this triangle, a B and a Y, and that corresponds to our primary colours. We're going to use that. So I'm going to take the red that I've dabbed, I'm going to paint into here. It's quite small, and I'm going to use the very tip of the brush to get into the corner. Notice I reorientate the work, fancy term for turn around. I turn around the work to paint into the next corner. I turn around again to paint into the next corner. Now notice I am not doing anything weird with my paintbrush. I'm not holding it smarty way at the end. There is a reason to do that, but this is not the time to do it. I'm holding it like I would hold a pencil, so I've got maximum control. Remember, we're at school, we are demonstrating skills. Now I'm painting along the line. Which part of the brush did I use to paint along the line? Watch again. Now I'm going to demonstrate this on my piece of paper. Bear with me a second. Let me set up my zone. So into a corner, I'm just going to draw a little corner. I am using the tip of the brush. Now, if I draw as a brush, so that's like the head of the brush, this is the metal section that holds everything together, that's the handle, these are the bristles. So I am using this point to go into a small corner. To go along a line, this is something we see happen a lot as teachers, so it's worth explaining to you. We often see painting that does this. because you've used the tip of the brush to paint along the line. And some of you, when you're new to painting, will not have a particularly steady hand. If you are a model maker, maybe you do have a steady hand, and if you do lots of little practical activities, you might have a steady hand already. So I'm going to suggest an easy way to paint along the line is not with the tip, is with the bristle. So I'm going to paint onto here exactly so you know what I mean. You can see how I can draw with a paintbrush fairly accurately, and ultimately hopefully you'll be able to do the same. So I'm using the edge of that bristle along the line and creating a nice clean line. So we're going to try that back on the colour wheel. So here we go again. I've got my paint, make sure that the consistency is about right. Well, it's a little bit patchy in the middle, I'm going to have to go over it again. Creating a little bit of shadow in this room, so I'm going to go and put a studio light on in a minute. Now I needed a bit more paint to go into this outer box here. Notice it's pointing to the outer circle, and in our previous colour wheel example we are making the outer circle here. So whilst I've got this colour, I'm going to paint into this section. If you notice the paint I've put down just there, it's dragging. We know that means there's not enough flow. We need a little bit more water. Dab, 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 dab. And along the line, edge of the brush, along the line, edge of the brush. I've gone quiet because I'm concentrating. Reorientate to make it as easy as possible for myself. I need a bit more paint in the middle. It's a bit textural, so I'm just going to gently stroke that paint around, move it around with the tip of the brush. And what I'm going to do for the corners, I am going in with the tip. Nice and neat. Right, I'm going to pop in another primary colour in a second, and then I'm going to come back to you and we're going to look about mixing our secondaries. Aiming for nice flat paint. I am actually running out of flow. A bit more water into it. One from tip to side there, and making sure the paint looks nice and even. If it looks too light, you might need to go over it because it will be a bit thin. Sometimes it looks patchy when it's thin. If it's doing this, you obviously need a bit more water into it and make it flow. So what I've done is I've popped the yellow in. Now I would argue that this yellow is not as clean as this yellow. This is a brighter, nicer yellow. This looks a little bit orange, so it's going to affect our colours, particularly in the blue range when we move into blue greens. But at the moment we will not worry about that, we will just go ahead with it. So we now need to mix these two primary colours, and in this exercise we did it by applying them and then just letting them blend to some degree. But remember, I need to select the correct red here. See how these pigments have got like different colours into them? They are not the best pigments in the world. I prefer the block paints we'd use in the department, but I couldn't think of a practical way to get those to the corridors. So, see what I'm doing? I'm getting good flow on the paint and I'm popping it onto here. Now I might do a little check. Move my work out of the way. That the paint is a good thickness. Yes, it is. Now I'm going to have to wash this brush because I'm going to go and mix it with the yellow. Now that's very dirty. That is going to contaminate my paint. I am making an orange, so it's not going to be too much of a problem. So here, dab, 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 dab. That's how you get the pigment into the water. Suspend it in the water. Now this yellow is absorbing more water than the red was. These are the properties that you begin to understand when you become an experienced artist and you become used to handling different materials. And it's why we all have preferences, because you find some things easier to control or have a more interesting effect. Now I'm going to argue that that's about right. Get my test paper up. Yeah, that'll do the job. So I need to mix some of this and some of this. And I'm going to do it on the palette. Now this type of paint comes with a little lid that becomes your palette. If they get dirty they need washing. Not so easy when you're teaching art in a maths room. So I've got about halfway between those two colours this orange. I've only got a little bit made so far. I think I probably just about have enough. And I'm going to paint it using the technique, get it so you can see, of using the tip of the brush to go into the corners, reorientate the work, make it easy for myself. I'm actually going to move the palette off the work zone because it's occupying part of my camera image. And now I'm going to use the edge of the bristle. Even though it's a slightly arced line, I can still do that quite easily using the edge of the bristle. I have to say I tend to paint the outline and then do the infill. I know I didn't do it on the last one, but that's generally the way I go about it. And now I'm filling in. I've been quite conservative with my use of paint here. So there is another mystery triangle, and it is the boundary between this shape and that one. And on this colour wheel it's designed for us to paint it with the same orange. So it is the sum of the red and the yellow. I am low on this paint and I don't ideally want to mix more at this moment in time, so I'm going to continue to be careful with it. You could say, well, you can just water it down. Yep, you could. A bit like when you have a cordial drink and you add more water, it becomes dilute, doesn't taste as sugary and yummy, and it looks lighter. And in this case, sugary and yummy isn't a thing, it just looks lighter. So I've managed to fill in that section. So what goes here? It is the sum of red, or crimson red, and our orange. Just even that out a little bit more. What goes there? It's the sum of our yellow and our orange. And I'm going to do the lighter colour first. I'm going to take some of the... I don't want it as dark as that one. If it is a bit too dark, I might need to add a bit more yellow. Now this might contaminate our paints. If we're sharing paints in a normal non-COVID world, this is why you have to work at the same pace as your companion. Maybe a touch more red. Maybe I've got a bit carried away there. So I'm going to say that's about halfway between the two. And pop it in. Corners with the tip. Now it might be that when we start trying to do this in the classrooms without access to sinks, we're going to have an art trolley, but if it becomes problematic, you will just continue our colour work using felt tips and water. But if we can, we'll use some paints as well. Want to give the best experiences we can. And until we try it, we don't know how it's going to go, but we're fine with that if you want to try things out. So you can see a bit of paint work in there and brush work in there. We're okay with that. And I'm now going to put my deeper orange over here. So it's got quite a lot of the red in it and not so much of the orange. Remember, the orange is just a bit of yellow. Really contaminated my yellow now. If your paints are contaminated, you just put them in water or under the sink, usually under a sink, just rinse them off and they become clean on the surface again. So it's beginning to look like that one, so I need a little bit more of my crimson red. I'm happy that it's not the same as that one and it's not quite as dark as that, it looks more orangey. So I'm going in with my tip, reorientating my work. The outline on the colour wheel isn't particularly clear there. But I'm thinking by now you're probably getting a bit skillful at this, so it's not going to hold you back. And you're aiming for two things. You're aiming for an accurate outer colour band, so this goes gradually between yellows through the oranges into the red, through the reds into the purples towards the blue, from the blue into the greens back to the yellow, so those will get lighter and lighter. And you're also aiming for good brush control and neat work. I'll stop there and you'll be able to continue in your classroom with support of your teacher.